After my cable access series, Mr. Massacre and the Debutantes, but before the Platoon of Power Squadron, I made a 92-minute feature film on very, very consumer-grade equipment called The Girl. Since you can't see The Girl anywhere, I thought we would do a cinematic study guide of that today, and you guys voted for it. Probably about 10 to 1. I've been in LA for a few years at this point. Me and my friends decided to make a movie. We did not have access to good equipment. Eliza reminded me that we had an actual shotgun boom mic and a boom pole because her arms got tired holding it when she came to visit during production. Our camera was a straight up mini DV. It did not shoot 24p. It was interlaced video, 4x3. I also paid so little attention to presentation that I arbitrarily letterboxed it. We just had tape on the top and bottom of the viewfinder so that we could see what letterbox would look like. And then I just letterboxed it to whatever I felt like. It's not really 16:9, it's not 235. It's just what I thought looked like letterbox. Quite a few years since I'd seen The Girl. Eliza and I sat down and watched it, and I have to say, I kind of liked it. Let us take a journey back to 2006, the release date of The Girl. We open on two guys talking. We see one of them take off his safety goggles, and they're talking about how the guy who's off screen is having problems with his wife. He steps on screen and his apron is bloody. They're drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes. I'm going to take a side note here, guys. There's so much smoking in this movie, it is crazy. Once again, I reiterate, young people, do yourselves a favor. Don't smoke the cigarettes. So they're having this conversation about how he does not trust his wife when she's hanging out with her male friends.
They met at the diner to hang out. So I'm like, whose bed was called the diner and which part of you was hanging out?
Duncan, the guy who has a problem with his wife, says that he hit her. Tim, the guy he's talking to, is very surprised by that. And that's when Trip chimes in. Trip is tied to a chair. He has been beaten very badly. He starts telling him, your wife's fidelity is not the problem. Your own personal insecurity is the problem. And then he's like, I'm gonna beat you up some more. Keith comes in the door. Trip wants to know why he has been kidnapped and duct taped to this chair. Keith says he wants to know who hired Trip to follow around this certain girl and take notes on her. Trip says he was not hired, he was merely looking for a fault line. He's like, tell me how you know this girl. Trip starts talking about how he knew her from high school, and he always liked her, which he confessed to her awkwardly in drama class.
I hate how you keep me up at night thinking about you.
Trip then talks about how he also has a twin brother who came in very handy in high school because he was always getting beaten up. His brother, Pierre, would switch clothes with him and then beat up the bullies. Trip and Pierre also then got a place together after high school, and Trip started writing for a magazine, and Pierre does we don't know what for a living. Trip drops into the conversation the fact that Duncan hit his wife. Keith is like,
you been hitting Jazz?
She was asking for it, Keith. Big time.
I used to hit her plenty. But watch yourself. The girl's got a fuse on her you don't want to light. Trust me.
So then Trip goes on about how he started writing a relationship column, which was basically about the intricacies of interpersonal relationships. So he claims what it really is about dudes who have no self-esteem and are always suspicious of their girls. That's basically what it is about. While he's out taking pictures for an article, Lauren's back from college and she runs into him and they get together and they have a date and then they start like dating and then they start hooking up. And at that point, Keith slaps Trip in the face and Trip's like, what?
I don't want any clear pictures in my head of you guys, you know, touching.
What kind of Mahachka operation is this?
Mahachka operation is another thing that we say forever. Mashugana, I think, is what I thought I was writing in the script, but Mahachka made it through every draft, every read-through, into the movie, and Eliza and I still say it all the time. He says, okay, I won't tell you about us making out or whatever, and then he goes back into telling his story and how when Lauren went back to school, it was a very emotional time for them. As she's leaving, she blows him a kiss, he catches it, goes and puts it on his ideas board, push pins the kiss there to keep it in place, and looking at it makes him happy. And then he starts talking about long-distance nightmares, and tonally this flick is all over the place too, because while he's having a nightmare about Lauren cheating on him, we pan up to these pictures. It's the most ridiculous. Anyway, then Lauren drops out and she moves back. She gets her own place though because they think living together immediately would be a little too much too soon. He's always spending time at her place. They go to the restaurant that she works at for dinner and she meets Mark, one of her co-workers, who is also an artist. Lauren's an artist. She was going to art school. She's a painter. Mark is like, hey, were you gonna come check out my paintings? Lauren is like, yeah, I thought I'd come after work tomorrow. And then Tripp, of course, goes into crazy guy mode again. Jealousy galore. He sits around stewing, imagining them having an affair. But then Lauren comes home one night. Side note, we were shooting in my little studio apartment in Encino, California. This guy walking by outside, that's just one of my neighbors coming home. You see him looking in like, what are they doing? That's him, we're shooting. I used that take because there was a person moving by outside. I thought, oh, that's like an extra, that's professional. Tripp accuses her of cheating on him, and she says, no, I'm not cheating on you. You're crazy, I love you. He storms out because he's a dumbass. He goes home and complains to his brother she's cheating on him with this guy named Mark from the restaurant. Then we find Tripp getting a phone call, and it's Lauren saying, I never want to see you again. You don't know how badly you hurt him. What do you think you were doing? You remind me exactly of my father. All this stuff. We see that Pierre, once again, has impersonated Tripp to try and take care of some of his problems by beating up Mark. Didn't work out, it's a backfire. Tripp is pissed at Pierre because he ended this relationship, but that was 4 years ago, and now apparently a week ago, Tripp stumbled onto them again. Mark and Lauren are apparently together. They live together now. So Tripp started stalking her, essentially, writing notes looking to see if they were happy, if he still had a chance. He sees that Mark looks very nervous when they're sitting together in the park drawing, and he was very interested to see where that was gonna go, except...
Get up.
yes, that was the day he was kidnapped.
What's this all about?
That's Tripp's story up until now. So he's like, so tell me, Keith, why are you so interested in Lauren? Keith is like, I don't know. But then we see he saw her outside of a cigarette shop one day, became immediately obsessed, and got on the phone with Tim.
Got it? Call Duncan, get on it.
Then Tim and Duncan are stalking Lauren, basically following around, taking notes on her. Duncan tells Tim that he needs to become more of a man, start dressing in suits, stand up for himself. Tim tells Duncan he needs to stop being so macho, and he never used to be this way in their old line of work. What's that? We don't know. So they give Keith a report on Lauren, and they say that the best contact point for her is this restaurant. Keith is like, great, okay, I'm gonna try contact there. Keep following her, and then he puts her file in this file folder with a bunch of hair colors. Presumably this has happened before. Duncan says he needs an advance on his paycheck because getting married was really kind of a rough time on his budget. And Keith is like, this is about jazz? Okay. Writes him a check and is like, you gotta learn to budget your money better though. Keith heads to the restaurant that night and we see him try to pick up Lauren. He is very awkward while he's talking to her and it doesn't fly. Lauren shoots him down. The guys call in the next day saying that there's another guy following her.
We weren't sure until today, but now he's got binoculars and everything.
Keith is like, yeah, okay, bring him to me. Duncan is like, you want us to still move forward with the boyfriend? And Keith is like, yeah. Bring me the new guy and then proceed as planned. And then we're back in the garage and Tripp starts to try and irritate the guys into turning on Keith when there is a noise outside. Keith tells Tim to go investigate it. Tim doesn't want to, but he goes. Tim gets knocked back inside. Uh-oh. What's going on? Somebody's out there. Who do you think it is? Jazz comes flying in with a baseball bat, Duncan's wife, and she starts beating all of them with an aluminum baseball bat, saying, you will never hit me again. What is going on? What are you lunatics doing? She turns on Keith and is like, is this what you do with Dad's money? Is this what you spend your allowance on? Hiring your friends to abduct people?
Is this a gun? You do not have guns! We do not have guns! You are gonna quit this job and you are gonna go and get a real one!
So she wails on everybody, and then she grabs Duncan's car keys, cuts Tripp loose, take my useless husband's work car, he won't need it anymore. Tripp hops in the car, drives. He drives to Lauren's house. He sits there outside watching her. She looks very anxious. Picks up the phone, dials a number. Yep, Tripp hears a phone. He goes to the trunk, opens the trunk, Mark's back there tied up. Instead of letting him loose, he closes the trunk and on we go. Duncan tells Jazz that they'll talk about this later. He needs to go get his car. Duncan and Tim take off. Keith and Jazz decide they're gonna go out for some dinner. Or breakfast, it's really late at night. Tripp doesn't know what to do with Mark. He brought him home, and he's sitting there awkwardly. He starts asking him about the relationship, and Mark says that they're really happy together, and he's pretty understanding about the whole being tied to a chair thing. Then he talks about how they ended up together accidentally. They were hanging out, but she was sad, and he was there. Over time, they kind of developed an actual loving relationship. Tripp is upset about that, because he really wants Lauren back. Keith and Jazz are sitting in a restaurant talking about their parents parents. We get a lot of backstory. Keith and Jazz's parents got divorced early. Jasmine went with mom, Keith stayed with dad. And the dialogue's good. I did them no favors by shooting this whole conversation in profile. Their performances were really good in this scene. It's all in profile, you can't see their eyes. Doggone it. What was I thinking? If I just brought the camera around just a little bit, boom. Problem solved. Would have been a much better movie, even though it wasn't in 24p or in any real aspect ratio. Duncan and Tim show up at Trip and Pier's house. Pier beats them up, and then...
Hey, Trip.
Hey, Trip. What are they doing here?
Watching TV.
Came from my car. You got the keys?
Yeah.
Mark gets himself loose and he almost escapes when Trip comes back into the room, and we see why Pier does all the Trip's fighting for him. They continue to battle and an engagement ring flies out of Mark's pocket. Then we end up back in the diner. Keith drops the bomb on Jasmine that she was adopted. He says that he was the one that picked her out at the orphanage and she got all of the attention after she was adopted and he should have chosen better. Is that a reason for why he so carefully tries to construct his relationships? I'll leave that up to the viewer. Or apparently not. I'll just explain it 7 years later. And we're back with Trip and Mark talking about the engagement ring. Trip's like, why are you better for her?
It's her choice, Trip.
And Trip realizes that yes, he's a stalker. Everyone's stalking this girl. Everyone's trying to manipulate her. The person she has chosen for herself is Mark. Tosses the ring back, tells him to take care of her, asks him not to tell her about all of this. Then we do all the wrap-ups. Keith, sitting in his truck, calls the newspaper to place an ad, presumably to hire more people to do his bidding. Because Tim and Duncan kept saying that it was their last night on the job. They were quitting. Then we see Tim take off his suit and put back on his telemarketer shirt. They were telemarketers before they got laid off and ended up working for Keith. Duncan comforts Jasmine about the new revelation. Mark gets home and is embraced by Lauren. Trip takes the pushpin off the board finally and tosses it. Lets Lauren go. That is the girl from 2006. My first feature. My first and only feature. I have not done a feature since. Despite how awful it looked, the actors did a really good job. The dialogue was pretty good for the most part. There were a couple times I got a little too flowery. This movie ended up in a couple very independent film festivals. A Star Award at the Indie Gathering, and a very kind reviewer who reviewed independent film compared it to Tarantino and Kevin Smith writing. The pacing of the movie, it moves very fast scene to scene. There are some pacing problems within the scenes themselves. The whole thing needs to be restructured and maybe kind of realigned a little more with reality. I've brought out into the light of day the thing that a lot of people would just stick in the old time capsule and bury, you know? So now here, in the anonymity of the internet, tell me, what is the one project that you would have hidden away that you've done in the past? Is it a story you wrote? Is it like something you did for school? I'm not like I know what you did last summer-ish. Something that you put some effort into, completed, and then years later said, nope, no one's ever gonna see that. What was that thing for you? So I was not excited about sitting down to watch The Girl. I thought it was going to be painful to watch after all this time, and I was pleasantly surprised in that I enjoyed the watching of it. That was The Girl.